welcome everyone in attendance. My name is Shannon Phillips. I'm the MLA for Lethbridge West, and I'm the chair of this committee. As we begin this morning, I'll invite members, guests, and LAO staff at table to introduce themselves. We'll begin with those in the room. We'll begin with the government assigned caucus, go around the table, and then we'll go to those of us like me who are joining us online.
Good morning, Mark Smith, MLA, Drayton Valley, Devon.
Good morning, everyone. MLA Jackie Lovely from the Camrose constituency.
Good morning, Miles Morris. I'm the Assistant Deputy Minister of Safe, Fair and Healthy Workplaces at Jobs, Economy and Northern Development.
Good morning. I'm Sonia Johnston, ADM of Financial Services and Senior Financial Officer for Jobs, Economy and Northern Development.
Good morning. Sean McLeod, Deputy Minister, Jobs, Economy and Northern Development.
Good morning. Andre Rive, Executive Director, Financial Services.
Tim Haysom, Executive Director of Employer and Program Services.
Morning, Rob Dreesen, Assistant Auditor General.
Marlon Schmidt, Edmonton Gold Bar.
Marie Renaud, St. Albert.
Good morning, Raki Pancholi, MLA, Edmonton Whitemed.
Good morning, Nancy Robert, Clerk of Journals and Committees.
Good morning, Warren Huffman, Committee Clerk.
Okay, now we'll go online. I see a number of members, including the Deputy Chair. So we'll start with you. We'll go with the government members to introduce themselves after that, please. Mr. Turton.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Cyril Turton, MLA for Spruce Grove and Stony Plain and Deputy Chair of this committee.
Good morning, Grant Hunter, MLA for Taber-Warner.
Good morning, Mohammed Yassin, MLA, Calgary North.
I see Mr. Panda and Mr. Stefan.
Good morning, Chair Prasad Panda, Calgary Edgemont.
Mr. Tour, your mic is muted, so if you just wouldn't mind introducing yourself once again.
Good morning, Chair Devinder Tour, MLA, Calgary Falconridge.
And Mr. Stefan.
Good morning, MLA Jason Stefan, Red Deer South.
And I do not know if I've missed anyone. If I have, please go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Morning, Gosia Sichiweklo. I'm ADM responsible for immigration and multiculturalism. Thank you.
Very good. If anyone joins us later, we will just simply leave a message to the clerk, and we can make sure that you get introduced for the record. So we will now note for the record the following substitutions: MLA Smith for MLA Singh. And a few housekeeping items to address before we return to the business at hand. Please note that the microphones are operated by Hansard staff. Committee proceedings are live streamed on the internet and broadcast on Alberta Assembly TV. The audio and video stream and transcripts of meetings can be accessed via the Legislative website. Those participating by video conference are encouraged to please turn on your camera while speaking and mute your microphone when not speaking. Members participating virtually who wish to be placed on the speakers list are asked to email or send a message to the committee clerk, and members in the room are asked to please signal to the chair. Please set your cell phones and other devices to silent for the duration of this meeting. So we'll now move to approval of the agenda. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll ask someone in the room move that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts draw up the draft agenda for today's meeting as distributed. And I'll just look to the room. Mr. Smith, thank you. Mr. Smith, that is so moved. Any discussion? All in favor? Are there any opposed? I did not hear anyone in the room, so I just want to test that when I called all in favor, I didn't hear anything, but I heard everyone online. And I did hear everyone introduce themselves. So. There we go. I heard that, Nancy, but not the all in favor piece. So. I'll just leave that. I'm going to assume that if somebody can give me a thumbs up that was all in favor. Very
Sorry,
good.
Madam Chair, it's Nancy. I wonder if perhaps since you're having audio issues, if you call the question, if perhaps people in the room could raise their hands just as an indication to you?
Yeah, I mean,
would that be okay?
Yeah, that's fine too. Are there any opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. Now we'll move to the approval of the minutes. We have minutes from the February 14th meeting of the committee. Do members have any errors or omissions to note? Looking to the floor and online, seeing none, I'll ask that someone move that the minutes of the February 14th meeting of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts be approved as distributed. Looking to the room, I see it moved by Member Pancholi. Thank you. Is there any discussion on this motion? I'll call for all in favor.
Aye.
Okay, heard that. Thank you. Are there any opposed? Seeing none, that motion is carried. I'll now welcome our guests from Jobs, Economy and Northern Development who are here to address the Labour and Immigration Annual Report from 21 and 22, the outstanding Auditor General recommendations, and I invite officials from the Ministry to provide opening remarks not exceeding 10 minutes. Your time begins when you start speaking. Thank you. Over to you, Deputy.
Good morning. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss the 2021-2022 Annual Report for Alberta Labour and Immigration. It's actually Jobs, Economy and Northern Development now, but at the time of this fiscal year it was Labour and Immigration. As you're likely aware, the annual report highlights initiatives that previously fell under the ministry I've just described, some of which now fall under Jobs, Economy and Northern Development, but also other ministries such as Trade, Immigration and Multiculturalism, as well as Skilled Trades and Professions. In addition to the folks who've introduced themselves today, I'd just like to highlight that Gosha Sichivakle is online. She's introduced herself, but at the time she was in Labour and Immigration, responsible for multiculturalism and immigration. She currently resides in the Trade, Immigration and Multiculturalism Ministry. And in the audience, we also have Scott Beebe, Executive Director, Business Supports, joining us today. In terms of the COVID pandemic was a once in a generation event, and the Ministry of Labour and Immigration was there to support workers and job creators as they navigated this public health crisis. In fiscal 2021-22, the second year of the pandemic, the ministry continued to support Albertans, helping them earn a living while safeguarding their own health and the health of their colleagues and loved ones. This included several supports for Albertans and job creators to ensure the safety of workers and the compliance of employers to reduce the spread of the virus, as well as helping keeping businesses and our economy afloat during challenging times. Some of those programs, such as the Emergency Isolation Support Program, were needed almost immediately to support Albertans who had to isolate due to COVID-19 until federal support, such as the CERB, took effect. The critical worker benefit helped us recognize thousands of hardworking Albertans who delivered critical services to support our province during the pandemic. And the Small and Medium Enterprise Relaunch Grant, or SMERG, helped support the recovery of businesses impacted by the public health restrictions. To support Albertans' health and safety during the pandemic, we passed the Employment Standards Amendment Act, also known as the COVID-19 Vaccination Leave, to allow all provincially regulated employees the option of 3 hours of paid job-protected leave to receive the COVID-19 vaccine. And as Alberta emerged from the pandemic, the ministry began to focus on economic recovery and diversification, as well as the long-term vision for work in Alberta. To that end, the ministry launched the single largest jobs training program in Alberta's history, Alberta Jobs Now, in the summer of 2021. The program allowed employers to apply for grants to cover 25% of an employee's salary for a 52-week period, up to a maximum of $25,000 per employee. Employers who hired people with disabilities received a grant of 1.5 times higher than the amount for other new employees. The grant could be used to cover salary or training costs. As of fall 2022, approximately 19,000 Albertans were working in positions approved under Alberta Jobs Now. In 2021-22, we also expanded the Canada-Alberta Job Grant eligibility, making an additional $18 million available to serve Alberta businesses in a time of need. The program allows employers to upskill new employees, retain staff in key positions, and offer training for career growth within the organization or support transition of staff to new roles. In 21-22, the program served nearly 12,000 learners and more than 3,000 employers across Alberta. We also continue to connect Albertans to jobs through training and employment services delivered across the province. Our various training for work programs, such as integrated training, self-employment training, and transition to employment, supported more than 4,500 Albertans in gaining skills to support meaningful and long-term employment. As pandemic-related travel restrictions began to lift and borders reopened, we also took steps to promote Alberta's advantages and benefits as a place to work and raise a family. This included the rebranding of the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program and the introduction of new immigration pathways, including the Rural Renewal Stream and the Rural Entrepreneur Stream. These streams are intended to help rural Alberta communities build their capacity to attract and retain newcomers and entrepreneurs to contribute to local economies by providing a streamlined path towards permanent residency. The accelerated tech pathway was also introduced on the Alberta Express Entry Stream, providing a fast track to permanent residency for highly skilled tech professionals who want to live in our province and work in Alberta's growing tech sector. In February, the Ministry hosted the inaugural Premier's Summit on Fairness for Newcomers, which brought together immigration stakeholders and regulatory bodies from across the province to discuss actions in support of newcomer success and, in turn, Alberta's economic growth. The summit was a one-day event with presentations and panel discussion on important issues and challenges faced by Alberta's newcomers, including foreign qualification recognition, integration and settlement, and the importance of immigration to Alberta's economy and workforce. Approximately 300 individuals attended the summit, both in person and virtually, representing immigrant-serving organizations, professional regulatory organizations, newcomers, and community development organizations. Along with newcomers, the government is also making it easier for Canadians to gain their certification in Alberta with the passing of the Labour Mobility Act in December 2021. This act helps reduce red tape by creating a consistent approach to recognizing out-of-province credentials, allowing more highly skilled Canadian certified professionals to come to Alberta and get to work on making the most of their potential. The Ministry of Labour and Immigration also led the government's anti-racism work in 21-22. In June 2021, the Alberta Anti-Racism Advisory Council released its recommendations on how to address racism in the province, which help inform the government's new anti-racism action plan. This work is helping ensure Alberta is a place of opportunity where everyone feels welcome and free to pursue their dreams. On February 24, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion of the Ukraine. This triggered a global humanitarian crisis, with Alberta heeding the call to support the Ukrainians displaced by war. Multiple government departments coordinated a provincial approach to Ukrainian arrivals led by the Ministry of Labour and Immigration. This included enabling access to important settlement and support services these individuals required as they arrived in Alberta. Through everything we undertook in 21-22, the government remained committed to working with employers, workers, and partners to ensure safe and healthy workplaces. This included beginning work to update the Occupational Health and Safety Code with a view to improving outcomes while empowering innovation. The government also expedited responses to COVID-related occupational health and safety complaints. In order to strengthen Alberta's competitive advantage and make it the most attractive destination for investment and job creation in North America, the Ministry of Labour and Immigration streamlined its core Certificate of Recognition, or CORE program. CORE is awarded to employers who develop health and safety programs that meet standards established by Occupational Health and Safety. A CORE demonstrates that the employer's health and safety management system has been evaluated by a certified auditor and meets provincial standards. Through the government's commitment to reduce red tape, the CORE program simplified and combined program standards, eliminating redundancies and obsolete program requirements. And the results were impressive, with a reported 22.6% reduction in requirements for the program in 21-22 fiscal year. The Ministry and its agencies, boards, and commissions have also reduced overall regulatory requirements by 16.9% since the government's red tape reduction initiative began in May 2019, making it easier for job creators to do business in Alberta while keeping employees safe and healthy in the workplace. In closing, I want to thank you for the opportunity to provide an overview of the accomplishments of the Ministry of Labour and Immigration in fiscal 21-22. As outlined, the Ministry undertook a number of initiatives that supported Alberta's workers and job creators while strengthening our workforce and our economy as we emerge from the pandemic. Thank you. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Deputy. We'll now move to the Office of the Auditor General. I believe Assistant Auditor General Rob Dreesen is in the room for any opening comments. You have 5 minutes, Mr. Dreesen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Our audit work on the Ministry in fiscal 21-22 included examining the financial reporting of the department and the financial statements of the Workers' Compensation Board. we issued an unqualified audit opinion on the WCB's fiscal 2021 financial statements. We have 2 outstanding recommendations with the department from performance work we reported in the past year. In May 2022, we recommended the department improve performance reporting processes related to its First Nation training to employment and Aboriginal training to employment programs. We found performance measures and targets were not regularly reviewed for continued appropriateness. Program monitoring was informal and no detailed results analysis. Program reporting was internal and focused on program outputs rather than on the achievement of program objectives and lessons learned. The department has provided us an implementation plan, which we are currently examining to determine if planned improvements would adequately deal with our recommendation. In November 2022, we issued a recommendation to the then Ministry of Jobs, Economy and Innovation to complete processes to verify eligibility of approved applications on the Small and Medium Enterprise Relaunch Grant Program. We found that inadequate verification processes were completed to conclude on eligibility of approved program applicants. The department assumed responsibility for this program as a result of the government restructuring in October 2022. We have not received an implementation plan as of yet from the department and look forward to receiving that from them soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, now I'll go to our normal questioning rounds just to remind everyone, we are in the 4 rounds, 15 minutes and then 10, 10, 10, and then 3 minutes to read questions into the record, a normal 2-hour meeting. So with that, we will begin with the official opposition for 15 minutes.
And thank you all for being here today. So the Alberta Jobs Now program created a stream for employers to hire disabled Albertans, which is great to see, by the way. Employers hiring a person with a disability can apply for a grant up to 37.5% of the new hire salary, up to $37,500 per employee, whichever is less. So can you tell me in the first 2 intakes how many disabled employees were hired?
AJMB provided this enhanced payment. Approximately 2% of employees hired identified themselves as persons with disabilities.
So 2% of 12,678 people were disabled employees?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. So can you tell me how many were in the first round?
I think that number covers the first 2 tranches.
The first 2 rounds. So it could have been like 1% in the first round, maybe? Fair enough?
I don't
sure,
know.
okay,
let's
say it was below 2%.
I don't know the distribution.
Let's settle there.
I'll just
So can I just ask you this question? After the first round, I know that there was some discussion in the annual report that eligibility or that criteria were changed. Did you make any changes based on the really dismal number of disabled employees that were being impacted by this really great program?
So we didn't make any changes with respect to that. And the challenge that we faced with that program and the feedback we got is it's frequently challenging for people to come forward and self-identify within a workplace. And so although there was, in some measure, a way of measuring it, only 2% of the employees, we don't know for sure what the actual access to the program was.
Could you walk me through the process? This is a huge investment, big program, government's really proud of this. Can you walk me through the process that your ministry undertook to develop this stream for disabled employees? Who did you consult to make sure that you got it right?
I don't remember specifically who we consulted, but I do remember conversations internally within the department about specifically attempting to access or facilitate access to this program for disabled employees. The principal policy decision was to increase the amount of the financial subsidy, and the principal sort of challenge that we faced, and there were conversations, I'm just not familiar exactly with what those conversations were.
So I know in the annual report there was, mention of, there were quotes from people talking about this program. There was an article in CBC, May 21, talking about the CEO of Helsim who gave advice to government while structuring this program. So there's got to be a record of who the ministry consulted, because there's a lot of expertise in inclusive employment out there, a ton of it, and a lot of disabled employees and employers that are, I'm sure, willing to provide advice to government. So could your ministry undertake to find out who was consulted to develop the stream for disabled employees and employers?
We can do that.
Okay, thank you very much. So could you tell me how many disabled Albertans were, you already told me altogether, 2%. How many of that 2% had previously been unemployed?
I don't know whether we have that number broken down.
Okay. Could you undertake to find that out for me?
If we have that number, we can.
Okay, so the program is very specific about the two streams, right? So it could be a new employee, or it could be an existing employee. So what I'm getting at is, of the 2% of the 12,678, 2% of those were disabled. How many were already employed in that organization or company, and how many were new employees? So if you could get that and give that back to the community, or to the committee, that would be great. And also, could you talk about the range of accommodations? Did you collect any information about what employers undertook to accommodate disabled employers? Because that's really important learning for any organization, is what accommodations were required by employers to make this a success. So could you tell me a little bit about that work, collecting that information that your ministry did?
Not specifically familiar with whether we collected that work, but if to the extent we did, I can provide you with that.
Okay. Could you tell me, so you mentioned earlier that, it was difficult for people to perhaps self-identify, so I'm assuming those would have been employees already employed within an organization or a company, but could you tell me what other processes were in place? What process did your ministry put in place to identify that, yes, indeed, the employee was disabled? Was there a box they had to tick? Was it some kind of self-disclosure? Was there an accommodation requirement? So how did the ministry know that 2% of 12,678 were actually disabled?
Through the application process, there was
just like a box?
Correct.
Okay.
I don't know if it was just a box, but there was an indication as to whether the individual as qualifying for that particular position was disabled.
Okay, so you may not be aware there are really extensive processes in other government departments and programs to identify disability, to verify that someone is in fact disabled. So if you could undertake to find out what is it that your ministry undertook or process was in place for an employee to identify the disability and perhaps talk about any accommodation, that would be most helpful. Okay, so just one more question about in the design, before the design or during the design. So I know I've mentioned this before, probably ad nauseum, but there are a couple of structures within government already that are in place to provide advice to ministries. So one of those is the Premier's Council on the Status of Persons with Disabilities. They've been around for a while. That is their function. I'm just wondering if there was did anyone from your ministry reach out to that body to talk about this really great program that was going to create employment for disabled Albertans? Any conversation whatsoever?
Mr. Rivet's just advised me that during the period between intake 1 and intake 2, because we were trying to sort of learn what in terms of the uptake, etc., direct outreach was made to industry associations, chambers of commerce, and disability-focused organizations in the summer of 21 to seek feedback on the program and how to encourage more employers to hire persons with disabilities to the program. So there was outreach made. I can provide you further information as you.
That'd be great. If you could provide the committee with a list of the organizations that were contacted, that would be great. Okay, I'm going to go back to another area here. So the ministry told us that the $263 million program, so we know 152.5 is committed in this reporting period, would do a few different things. So one, it would encourage employers to hire, train new staff, gain current updated skills. Two, it would focus on the hiring of under or unemployed Albertans. And employers were also able to fill available positions with employed Albertans if there was a business need. So could you tell me what process your ministry undertook for businesses to identify that business need, to change that criteria, and what were they required to include in terms of information?
So the change effectively was to allow greater flexibility in the program. With respect to the specifics on the business need, I'd have to go and check check that.
So you will check then and get back to the committee on what were the specific needs that businesses had to identify to be exempt from that criteria or to sort of circumvent that criteria. Yep, correct? Okay, perfect. So the annual report indicates the Alberta Jobs Now program resulted in 12,678 new hires or 2 intake periods. So of the 12,678, how many jobs total were filled by unemployed Albertans?
So we have it on a percentage basis.
Okay.
62% of the jobs filled were unemployed Albertans.
So 62% were filled by unemployed Albertans. Okay, terrific. And of the 12,678 positions filled by this program, how many of the positions were vacant positions as opposed to newly created positions?
Again, if we did, we can give you.
Okay, so if you could get back to the committee on, of the 12,678, how many were new jobs and how many were vacant positions? Okay. The annual report notes the Alberta Jobs Now program was designed to assist employers responding to labor shortages. Employers, according to the annual report, indicated that as vacancy rose, they struggled to fill those vacancies. So at the time that the program was designed, what data was used to support those statements? So as we noted in the research briefing, there was anecdotal information, but there was no specific data. So what was used to support like the labor shortage? So we heard from the ministry there were huge labor shortages in some sectors. What did the ministry do to identify those sectors? What data was used to support the creation of this program?
Yeah, so we have a group within the department that is specifically responsible for labor market information. So that was the principal group. So we certainly looked to that.
Okay.
In addition, we had a whole host of information around various sectors and people in those sectors, the number of people in the sectors, that type of information.
Mm-hmm. So do you have the breakdown of the 12,678? Do you have a breakdown of what sectors that those positions were created? So would you be able to table that with the committee?
It may be that I can quickly provide it here.
That's okay, I'm running out of time, so that'll eat up too much. If you could table that with the committee, I would appreciate that very much.
That's fine.
Okay. So I asked this question sort of about the program for disabled employees, but I'd like to ask it about the larger program. So changes were made to program design for the second intake to support, and we know the program was fine-tuned a third time, so going into the third intake, which this report does not cover. But I'm wondering if you could walk us through the process and who was involved in making those changes.
So the process really was an internal review of the activity to date, the feedback we received from employers and others during the hiring process, a continual sort of monitoring of the environment, I guess more broadly, because there was feedback we were getting with respect to the program. And also, I remember at the time the minister meeting specifically with a number of groups to effectively get feedback with respect to the program. So that was principally sort of the process that we used.
Any feedback whatsoever from employers regarding disabled employees?
I don't remember specifically that feedback, but once again, we can perhaps include it as
I guess what I'm getting at is, for the amount of attention and announcement around this I guess, piece of this Alberta Jobs Now program, it's kind of dismal. 2% is pretty dismal. And I would suggest after the first round, you probably knew it was pretty dismal. And I'm asking, what happened when you figured out it wasn't really working the way you thought it was? What did you do differently?
I think I've undertaken to sort of give answers to those questions, and happy to do that. I would also say, and my colleagues just reminded me, there was one specific change. So one of the pieces of feedback was that certain, on average, folks with disabilities were working fewer hours than able-bodied individuals, and so we reduced that requirement from 30 hours to 15 hours to attempt to accommodate that need. So that was the one specific policy change that was made based on feedback.
And so you reduced from 30 hours a week to 15 hours a week, and that was based on what?
Based on the feedback that on average, people with disabilities were working less total hours in a week than someone
Just out of curiosity, where'd you get that feedback?
I don't have the specific organization's name, but
could you get that for the committee? That would be great. I would appreciate that. Now, can you tell me, so you are already going to provide the committee with a breakdown of the sectors. So can you tell me, do you have a breakdown generally of, how many of these 12,678 new jobs or existing jobs were in large corporations as opposed to small and medium businesses?
So the demographics for the program were small organizations with 1 to 49 employees, 83.6%. Medium-sized organizations, 50 to 499 employees, 14.86%. And large organizations with 500 or more employees, about 1.5%.
Okay, and how about nonprofits?
I don't know whether we have that specifically or not.
So if you could get that number for nonprofits, that would be great. And I am out of time, so I will stop there. Thank you very much.
The honourable member will now move over to our friends on the government side. 15 minutes. Your time starts. I think the clock is just elapsing now for the official opposition time, so they'll cede that time, and we'll start with the government members for 15 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to say that folks who live in the Camrose constituency are often interested in how much red tape is being reduced by our government, and they ask me these questions quite frequently. It's something that I'm very proud of the work that's being accomplished. So on page 63 of the annual report, you indicate that the department reduced 1,800 requirements over the course of the year. How did reducing these 1,800 red tape requirements actually make things better for Alberta workers and employers? And on page 63 and 64, you state in several places that you created portals to help reduce red tape. Can you explain how these portals create efficiencies and help people who are accessing your programs and services?
I certainly can answer that question, and thank you for the question. And I don't know whether we do these sort of informal things at these types of meetings, but I'm going to do it anyways. I just want to let you know I'm a graduate of the college in Camrose and have a new daughter-in-law who has lots of family in the Camrose area. So
thank you.
We have that in common. Yes, in answer to your questions, yes, a number of the red tape reduction initiatives in 21-22 made things better for Alberta workers and employers. The ministry continues to remove regulatory barriers and reduce costs for Alberta job creators, modernize our legislation, and improve the delivery of government services while ensuring effective regulatory oversight over health and safety protections. For example, the Partnerships and Injury Reduction Program simplified and modernized the partnership standards, resulting in an improved certificate of core recognition program for all stakeholders, as I mentioned in my opening comments. The reductions included rescinding certificate of recognition options that were complex and expensive for employers. The program also reduced duplication within standards, such as simplifying site sampling requirements, reducing the cost and time of an audit for the employer, eliminating out-of-province employer health and safety performance reports. The ministry also eliminated the requirement for employers to record an employee's daily hours. Now employers have the flexibility to record hours at intervals that work with the business operations requirements. Land agent licensing completed an in-depth review of all forms and policies to identify areas for reducing burden while maintaining program standards and compliance. Land agents licensing was able to reduce regulatory requirements for both applicants and the general public who interact with the office. Additionally, the department undertook administrative burden reduction projects related to improved service delivery and speeding up approvals for Alberta workers and employers. The Alberta Advantage Immigration Program expanded services available to online applicants via an online portal, creating a one-stop service shop for clients. This work resulted in efficiencies that allow for more expedited processing of these types of applications. Streamlined application assessment processes reduced time spent on assessing files and resulted in more timely decisions for clients while still maintaining program integrity. The Employment Standards Portal eliminated the need for paper permit and variance applications. The Education Outreach and Partnership Outreach form was streamlined to require only essential information and allow stakeholders to indicate their specific preferences. Paperless certificates of recognition are now produced as a secure electronic form rather than as a printed paper certificate. Employers can access the document or reprint their certificate of recognition directly through the WCB's online services. This change significantly decreases red tape and increases efficiency as employers no longer have to wait for their certificates of recognition to arrive in the mail. In addition, in December, the government committed to reviewing the OHS legislation and associated regulations. The purpose of this review was to improve outcomes while reducing administrative burden, simplifying requirements and language, and remove duplication to improve clarity, evaluate if outcomes can be improved through the use of performance-based requirements, update technical provisions to reflect current best practices for OHS, and align the OHS code with other provinces where applicable. The OHS accounts for a substantial portion of the department's regulatory requirements. The review presented an opportunity to reduce administrative burden for employers and workers, for example, by shifting from prescriptive to performance-based requirements where appropriate, removing the need for unnecessary approvals and harmonizing with other jurisdictions. In terms of your specific question with respect to the creation of portals, the Ministry continues to improve its efficiency both internally and externally by providing online mechanisms or portals for stakeholder delivery and effectiveness. For example, the portals allow Albertans and job creators to submit applications or report situations related to employment standards and occupational health and safety legislative requirements. Portals make it easier for Albertans to access government services by enabling the filing of complaints or submitting application and reports anywhere at any time online. Allowing users to save progress and return later or cancel or abandon their submission. And automatically pre-screening for jurisdiction and referencing users to other agencies where necessary. Internal benefits include reducing the time spent entering data by automatically transferring data into our compliance management systems and reducing errors and improving data quality by relying on enhanced data validation and removing the requirement for manual entry. This allows the staff to spend more time on frontline services for Albertans. And I could just say with respect to this, it's sort of a step-by-step process, but in particular the automation process I think is really effective, and we're really proud of some of the work that the department's done in that regard.
Well, thank you so much. I'm very proud of the work that you and your team have accomplished. Let's switch gears a little bit now and focus on Jobs Now program. On page 20 of the annual report, you indicate that changes were made to the second intake of the Alberta Jobs Now program to increase uptake. Can you tell me more about the changes to the program and how the changes supported the province's economic recovery?
As I've already discussed to some degree in the first round of questioning, direct outreach was made to industry associations, the Chambers of Commerce, and disability-focused organizations in July and August of 2021. The purpose of that outreach was to seek feedback on changes to the program and how to encourage more employers to hire persons with disabilities to the program. In Intake 2, improvements were made to the program to help Albertans get back to work, and more employers find the help they need to assist with economic recovery. Opening the program to Alberta businesses and nonprofits that were incorporated or registered for less than a year was one of the changes that was made. Reducing the minimum number of hours employees had to work under the program from 30 to 15 hours per week was one of the changes that were made. While the focus was on hiring unemployed and underemployed Albertans, employers were able to fill available positions with employed Albertans if there was a business need, which was already discussed in the first round of questioning. And then finally, reducing the amount of time employers had to fill position, or actually reducing the number of positions that employers could apply for intake from 20 to 10 was an attempt to spread the program around amongst more employers themselves.
Thanks again for the good work that you and your team have accomplished. Let's go to labor mobility. On page 32 of the report, it talks about the work that your department has done to reduce barriers for Canadians licensed in other jurisdictions. You mentioned that the department has been working with other Canadian jurisdictions on this issue. Can you expand on some of the changes that you've implemented? And in the next paragraph, the report says that the average processing time decreased by 40% from 2019 to 2020. What was the average processing time for 2021? And finally, how was this decrease achieved?
Part of the sort of the cross-jurisdictional work that we do, a Pan-Canadian Labour Mobility Working Group operates under the Forum of Labour Market Ministers and works towards removing barriers to labour mobility across provinces and territories. In 2021, the working group focused on improving communication and transparency of labour mobility requirements to ensure that workers in regulated occupations can benefit from opportunities in other jurisdictions and from streamlined certification processes for domestic mobility applicants. In terms of the processing times for 2021, that information is not yet available. We're currently compiling that information. We'll provide it when it's available. And in terms of the 40% decrease, how was that achieved? During 2020, in response to the pandemic, many regulatory bodies moved to remote work and increased their online services, making it more accessible. This in particular allowed us to decrease processing times as a result.
Thank you so much. With that, I'd like to turn my remaining time over to my colleague, MLA Mark Smith.
Thank you. And just for MLA Lovely's knowledge, my daughter also graduated from Camrose University of Alberta program there.
It's Canada Day today.
Yeah, it is. Well, I'd like to turn your attention to the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, if I could, for a few minutes here. On page 36, you mentioned that you created a new tech pathway under the Express Entry Stream for the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program. Now, what is the difference between a stream and a pathway? And what are the advantages of creating the tech pathway, and why did you create a pathway for that particular sector? And lastly, on page 38 of the annual report, you give some numbers on the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program retention. And I see that the percentage of Alberta Advantage Immigration Program nominees who are still residing and working in Alberta 1 year after obtaining permanent residency is over 89%. Why is retention a good measure of this program? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. With respect to the difference between a stream and a pathway, we'll probably have to do some work on choosing some different terminology in the future, because I agree it certainly can be challenging for people to understand that. I think in many ways people view those terms as interchangeable. In this case, however, the accelerated tech pathway, as opposed to the tech stream, is an alternative approach towards selection of candidates through the Alberta Express Entry Stream. The general Alberta Express Entry Stream, so the broader stream, uses selection factors to send notifications of interest based on dynamic economic priorities, which has minimum criteria such as comprehensive ranking system score of at least 300. In addition, the stream also uses one or more of the following selection factors that increase the chance of selection, those being having an Alberta job offer, being a graduate of a Canadian post-secondary institution, having a parent, child, or sibling who is a Canadian citizen or permanent resident living in Alberta, and or having French as a first language. The accelerated tech pathway shares the same minimum criteria, but also allows persons to express interest in being selected through a web form, so they can self-identify as someone who's interested in the tech world. The web form is based on additional criteria serving sector needs, such as the person's primary occupation being an eligible tech occupation and the job offer from an Alberta employer being an eligible tech industry job. When the form is received, AAIP will send prospective eligible candidates a link to apply to the program. Once a person applies based on the link, the AAIP assesses their eligibility for pathway, and if eligible, issues an Alberta Express entry stream nomination. The advantages of creating the tech pathway and why we did it, I think, was your second question. This program really was designed in response to demand within the province and demand to both grow the sector, but also demand from the sector saying they were simply short of people. So it was one of the tools that was used to help with that. It was designed to support economic recovery by accelerating the growth of the tech sector in the province and strengthening Alberta's tech workforce. The pathway has minimized the employer role in the process for recruiting foreign tech workers while providing maximum benefits to employers operating in a tech industry. It provides an expedited process to employers as an alternative to the federal labor market impact assessment process. Tech professionals from across Canada and overseas with a job offer in an in-demand tech industry occupation are fast-tracked by the AAIP, getting them to permanent residence sooner. In addition, the AAIP will provide a work permit support letter to the employer to get their worker here faster while they wait for their permanent residency status. There are time and cost savings for employers because the pathway has no employer fees, and if the worker needs a work permit support letter from AAIP, it saves the employer the time and the cost of the LMIA process. The LMIA process being a labor market impact assessment process that has to be complied with otherwise. Your final question, I think, was referencing page 38 of the annual report, where we give some numbers with respect to retention under the AAIP and why that's important. It is important to monitor the outcomes of these nominations. Provincial nominee programs across Canada are designed to meet regional labor market needs. And really fundamentally what we're trying to do is we're trying to get people to come to Alberta. And obviously we'd like them to stay. And so if we monitor whether they're staying, that's sort of the best way we can figure that out. And if we have a high retention rate, it's obviously a bonus. And so we're really happy to see that retention rate. We traditionally over time have had a very high retention rate in Canada with respect to our new Canadians that come to the province. And so it's just been a real success, and we hope that that continues in the future.
How much time do I have? 3 seconds. We'll cede it over to the officer.
Thank you, Honourable Member. We'll now go to the official opposition for 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first set of questions deal with the critical worker benefit, a program which is discussed on page 21 of the annual report. On May 7th of 2020, the federal government announced $347 million of funding for Alberta to provide wage top-ups to critical workers. That money flowed to the province on June 1st of 2020. And by the end of the summer of 2020, BC and Ontario had already completed the rollout of their programs, yet Phase 1 of Alberta's program didn't conclude until March of 2021. Why did Alberta's critical workers have to wait almost a year longer than workers in other provinces to receive the wage top-ups that the government committed to?
As announced in 2020, but then also announced at the time that the critical worker benefit program was rolled out in early 2021, there was activity that was undertaken. And so specifically, a total of $12 million for a wage top-up for healthcare workers was made at that time. And there was also an additional $18 million for designated workers caring for Alberta's most vulnerable made at that time. So during the 2020 time period, there was activity going on with respect to that program, specifically with respect to those two initiatives. And then there was a request made of the department to go and continue to work not only to help with the work that we've done with respect to those two programs, but also to reach out across ministries and develop a comprehensive plan with respect to this program. And so both the initial work, but also the work that took place ultimately resulted in the program. We were hoping to have it sooner, but that's ultimately the time it took us to get that program together and get it through the approval process and roll it out. I would also say that, and I don't want to, I guess, use this as an excuse, but it probably was as busy a time as our department has ever experienced. And so that, I think that contributed to it a little bit as well.
Well, that's cold comfort to the people who had to wait to know that the department was too busy to write them $1,200 checks. The annual report says that the number of eligible workers across all eligible sectors was ultimately lower than the best estimates available to partner ministries. Now, according to the figures in the report, the ministry provided the critical worker benefit to approximately 140,000 Alberta workers, but they expected to provide many more, but the report doesn't say how many more. So how many more workers did the government expect to qualify for the program?
So we were intending to spend the entire amount of the money, and ultimately came very close to doing that. But the challenge that we really faced was we were using the best data we had, but it was not as solid as we.
And I'm just looking for a number. If you could just tell me a number.
We can get you the specific number.
Thank you very much. Because the eligibility.
Actually, sorry,
Yep.
Andre has it for you.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks, Sean, and thanks, member, for the question. So the $465 million, which was the total amount for the entire program, would have provided a benefit to approximately 380,000 workers. Ultimately, with the amount that was spent across the entire program, we ended up providing a benefit to just under 344,000 workers.
344,000 workers. Okay, so that is across all government. How much did labor and immigration pay out to private sector workers?
Yes.
That was specifically under your mandate.
Correct. So labor and immigration in the first phase paid out $121.3 million. And in the second phase of the program, $63.6 million.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't clear. My question wasn't about the number of dollars, but how many people did you expect to qualify for the program that for private sector workers versus how many actually received the benefit?
Yeah, I'll have to get back to you with those specifics.
But there's 37,000 Albertans that you expected to get the benefit who ultimately didn't. Because this is important because eligibility requirements were a significant point of contention when the program rolled out. The government set the number of hours to qualify at a level 3 times higher than most other provinces. The eligibility period also did not include people who were working during the first wave of the pandemic. Many workers who thought that they were critical workers, food delivery drivers, workers in retail allowed to stay open during the most stringent public safety measures like hardware and liquor stores, were not eligible for the program. Ultimately, the government spent less than you were expecting to, suggesting that the eligibility criteria excluded people who even the government thought should have qualified. So how were these eligibility criteria set?
The eligibility criteria were set based on principally the desire to get funding into the hands of low wage frontline workers who were working and providing essential services during the pandemic, in essence. Those were the basic considerations with respect to the program.
So there were 37,000 fewer people on the list than you expected to. Were there 37,000 people who ultimately didn't qualify, or would you say that you set the eligibility criteria too high?
I don't think it was the eligibility criteria. It was our estimate of attempting to figure out how many people were in the various buckets and how to design the program in a way that allowed both a reasonable estimate of the number of people who would apply relative to the funding that was available. Okay. And so it turned out that was simply very challenging, and we oversubscribed throughout the program to attempt to address that issue. But each time when we did it, we didn't want to have a huge number of people disappointed, and so we tried to get a number of eligible people that fit the program. Once again, we significantly oversubscribed, but at the end of the day, there was about 5% of the program that was underspent.
Right, so it's oversubscribed but underspent, which is definitely could have been the unofficial motto of the government for the last 3 years. Who did the government consult with to set up the eligibility criteria?
We consulted both internally and externally with respect to folks in industry. Once again, the principle.
Can I get a list? Do you have a list that you could table with the committee?
We can table information.
Okay,
with
thank you.
respect to that.
Thank you very much.
The principal issue was not. I think we understood the labor market. I think we sort of understood the various buckets. Once again, the principal issue was attempting to figure out how many people were in that bucket and how many people would ultimately apply.
Okay, so we'll dig into this a little bit more. At some point during the fiscal year in question, it must have become clear that not all of the money allocated to the program was going to be spent, and that meant thousands of Albertans expecting a little help from a government that had committed to help them would be left on their own. Was the minister informed prior to the conclusion of the program that not all of the money allocated to this program was going to be spent?
Ultimately, as I say, a relatively small percentage of the money was not spent, although we did our very best to spend all the money. The minister, as is normal, is apprised of all relevant sort of business that he should know.
At the time the minister was informed, was the possibility of expanding eligibility to spend all of the money allocated ever considered?
We didn't expand eligibility. What we did was we went and expanded the basic buckets, the various pieces within the sector that we were including in the program to try to maximize the spend. That was the way we increased the opportunity.
Sorry, can you translate that into non-bureaucratic speak? What do you mean by expanding the buckets?
Eligible private sector, I'll just read from this. Eligible private sector workers in the second phase included truck drivers, agricultural workers, security guard cleaners, funeral workers, employees of quick service and dine-in restaurants, and taxi and limousine services, which were not included in the first phase of the program.
Right. But I mean, even during the second phase of the program, it must have become clear that you weren't going to spend all of the money allocated. So was there any consideration of expanding the eligibility beyond what had already been expanded in phase 2? So that all of the money could be spent?
We ran the program for 2 phases. We expanded the eligibility by occupation type effectively in the second phase. There was, as I say, approximately 5% of the money that was left at the end of the program, and a decision was made to not go ahead with it.
So who made that decision?
The decision was made by government.
Specifically?
The decision was made by government, ultimately in consultation with our minister and perhaps others.
Okay. It's incredibly frustrating. How much money was ultimately unspent? Sorry, you said 5%?
I've just lost the audio, but I think the time was up. Is that why? Okay. Very good. We'll go to the government side for 10 minutes then.
Madam Chair, we'll focus our time here for a few minutes here on the rural renewal and entrepreneur stream. And we see on page 33 that in 2022, the government of Alberta launched 2 new immigration streams, the rural renewal and rural entrepreneur stream. Can you expand on who is eligible for each stream and what they have achieved since their launch? How do these streams differ from other active streams? And what has been the uptake of these new streams? Thank you.
Gosha, I'm just going to ask you, if not I can do it, but are you available to answer that question, Gosha?
Yes, I am for sure. So in terms of the eligibility for rural entrepreneur stream, there are a number of criteria that entrepreneur needs to meet, and they relate to work experience. So they need to have a minimum of 3 years of work experience in an active business. as a owner manager, they need to complete a minimum of high school equivalent to the Canadian standard. They need to have a business plan with projected financials, meet language requirements, and this is CLB 4 that is required for this particular category. They have to have a minimum net worth of 300,000, with all assets being the candidate or partner's own personal holdings. They need to invest a minimum of 200,000 into the business. And there are also requirements around the ownership and creations of the job. There is a requirement that we need to create at least one full-time job for Canadian citizens or permanent residents. And finally, they need to have a community support letter from a participating rural Alberta community, because this program is a partnership between government of Alberta and communities. Communities are expressing interest of being part of this program, and they are enrolled, and then they are posted on our website. So potential entrepreneurs across the world, they are aware which community is interested in them starting the business in this community. In terms of achievement, the program was launched, both Rural Renewal and Rural Entrepreneur Program was launched on February 16th, 2022 during the Premier Summit on Fairness for Newcomers. So within the annual report time frame, the program has, it was just a few weeks when the program was in duration. So that time was just spent to promote the program, and communities were starting to get ready to become part of the program. So that was so we didn't have intake, and as expected, because the program was just launched at the end of the fiscal year.
Okay, so let's start looking at employment rates, okay? Page 41 of the report shows that the employment rate in the province over the past few, it shows the employment rate in the province over the past few years. And I see that the employment rate bounced back significantly from 2020 to 2021. So what factors do you think allowed for this increase to happen? How did this employment rate compare to other provinces? And the report mentions that municipalities such as Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Camrose, and Drumheller had the lower employment rates in the province in 2021. What factors do you think contributed to these lower employment rates? Based on previous statistics, have these municipalities consistently had a lower than average employment rate?
Thank you for the question. As with many things employment related, there are a variety of factors related to that. In this case, that rate is driven by a number of factors, including the economy, demographics, social factors, and others. A strong economy in particular can have a positive impact on the employment rate. But demographic factors like aging population and related things like that can have certainly a negative impact on it. So it's sort of a multifaceted indicator. Certainly, according to the 21 to 2030 Alberta Occupational Outlook, a labor demand and supply forecast for Alberta, both employment levels and the total supply are expected to steadily rise over the next 10 years. As a result, the outlook suggests that the employment rate will remain stable over the coming years, which is obviously a good thing for us. In terms of how this compares to other provinces, maybe I'll just start by saying, just defining it just so folks understand that. The employment rate is the number of persons employed expressed as a percentage of the population 15 years of age and older. In January 2023, outside the reporting time period, but just for reference, Alberta had the highest employment rate of all provinces at 66.1%, with Canada's employment rate being 62.5%. This has typically been attributed to a relatively young population, with the average age in Alberta being 39, but also generally to the strength of the economy as well. Finally, with respect to your question related to specific municipalities, Camrose, Drumheller, and Lethbridge, Medicine Hat have historically had lower employment rates relative to other economic regions in Alberta. The primary contributing factor to lower employment rates in these regions is an older population with a higher proportion over 65, which I've indicated is part of the calculation, but obviously a group that tends to be employed at a lesser rate. So.
Thank you. And I'll pass my time over to MLA Yassin.
Good morning. I hope it's not as snowy as it is in Calgary for everybody else out there. It has probably snowed about at least 4.5 over the last 24 hours. But my question here is related, it relates to OHS operations, occupational health and safety. And I note that on page 44, number of inspections conducted each year. And I specifically note the year 2020, 2021. In that year, there were significantly more inspections done from the year before and year after. So I'm thinking that may be related to COVID inspections, or was there a different reason for that?
Thank you for the question, MLA Yassin. I'm going to ask Miles Morris to provide an answer to your question.
Thanks, Deputy. So in short, the pandemic brought about a new hazard to deal with in the workplace. That played out in terms of our inspection activity. Certainly within the first year of the pandemic, our inspection numbers rose significantly. And did come down a bit the second year, but we're still higher than pre-pandemic levels. So the primary driver is that there was a new issue on the scene, and we developed processes to make sure that we could keep up with that new issue in terms of our inspection activity.
Okay, well, thank you. I also see that the number of OHS written order for 2021, 2022 dropped heavily since 2019. What is the reason for that?
Thank you for that question. We're always refining our approach within occupational health and safety. Our officers have a variety of tools at their disposal to ensure that compliance with legislated standards is met. The writing orders is one of those tools. However, we have noticed that there are many situations where our officer, in the course of conducting an inspection, can basically get compliance on the spot, noting a non-compliance, asking the worksite parties to take corrective action. It's done on the spot, and no orders are written. That's a more efficient process. Gets what we need in terms of getting compliance with legislative standards, and gets the worksite parties back to doing their regular work quicker. So greater use of that rather than jumping straight to an order is a primary explanation for that difference.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. The number of businesses contacted for the first time also seemed highly variable. Why was 2021-22 such an outlier compared to the previous 2 years? What's the long run?
Excuse me, Mr. Yassin? Mr. Yassin, can you hear me? The timer sounded, so the time has run out there. Madam Chair, can you hear me? Mr. Deputy Chair, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so the timer's run out, so we'll be going over to the official opposition for the third rotation.
Okay, I sometimes I can't see when the person, if it's Mr. Yassin speaking, I can't see if the timer's run out, but I can if it's the deputy, and I also can't hear it. So, but I guess that's a problem we can solve later. We'll now go over to the official opposition for 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What a treat to see a minister ask questions about the report that he signed off on here at Public Accounts. Anyway, the Critical Worker Benefit Program in Alberta was designed so that employers applied for the benefit on behalf of their employees. This is a stark contrast to other provinces which designed their programs to allow for employees to apply directly. The government also committed more than $30 million when they announced the program to employers for their so-called administrative costs. But the report doesn't mention how much was ultimately given to employers for their administrative costs. So what was that number?
Go ahead, Andre Hervé is going to answer your question.
Thanks for the question. So to answer the first piece around the administration costs, so what occurred was we, in order to deliver through employers, we added a 7.66% in terms of funding onto the payments that we were providing. And that was to cover the costs of CPP and EI that they may have in terms of payroll expense to provide the benefit to their employees. So each payment that went out was essentially the $1,200 payment. Ultimately became a payment of $1,292 per employee, and that was given to employers to cover those costs. Because as you mentioned, they were clearly supporting the government and their employees by delivering the program.
You've given me what was the total spend then?
So the total spend, so we could have to go back and provide you with the calculation, but ultimately it would just be a percentage of the overall amount spent on the program itself.
So if I took 7.66% of $465 million, that would give me an approximate estimate of how much was spent?
Right, but
okay,
the 465 million too, just to be clear, that was the total program allocation.
Right,
and the amount
so
spent was
$430 million was the total spend. So if I multiplied that by 7.66%, I would get the...
That would be roughly
costs?
amount. That would be the rough amount. Now I don't have the specifics with me, but I do know there were a few employers that chose not to accept that additional payroll funding, and so they did ultimately return that back to the department.
So, okay, how many additional employees would have received the benefit if you hadn't topped up employers' administrative costs?
So the number of employees that would have received the benefit wasn't affected by the payroll cost that was calculated into the program. So once again, to go back to the question in terms of the overall uptake, the uptake was not what we were hoping and what we expected in terms of the total amount, but it wouldn't have prevented us from providing the benefits to every eligible worker had there been enough applying for the program.
So what mechanisms were in place to ensure that employers were applying on behalf of all of their eligible employees?
So I think the principal mechanism that was in place was communication with respect to the program. And so we attempted to ensure that all Alberta employers were aware of the program, and as a result allowed them to apply.
Was there any audit or confirmation done of employers applying on behalf of all of their eligible employees? Was any of that verification work done?
So we are doing verification work currently. We think that the principal outstanding matter relates to whether that funding was in fact transferred from employers to employees. We don't have any reason to believe that it wasn't. We don't have any evidence that it wasn't, but that's the only remaining outstanding sort of audit type of work that we're going to be doing.
You weren't looking for it, so of course there's no evidence for it. You never find evidence for things you're not looking for. Was there any way for employees to know whether their employer had applied for them on their behalf?
There was. We not only advertised the program, but we published a list of all employers who were participating in the program. So you certainly were able as an employee to understand whether your employer...
Sure, but maybe my employer doesn't like me and didn't apply for me specifically, because you had to apply individually. How could I, as an individual employee working at an eligible outfit, know that the employer had applied on my behalf specifically as an individual?
Go ahead, Andre.
Thanks, Deputy. So, just wait for my mic to come on.
There.
Thank you. And thanks for the question. So just to expand on that, there was employees and folks who were able to contact the department with any questions that they might have. We received a significant number of inquiries related to the program. Primarily, the inquiries were related to eligibility criteria and just essentially asking whether or not they were eligible for the program. And in all of the communication that we received through call centers and through direct contact with the minister's office and through the department, there was no indication, and there weren't any sort of questions or flags being raised around folks indicating that they believed they were eligible and that they hadn't received the payment. In addition to that, pardon me, as the deputy mentioned, we're currently undertaking the post-payment verification, reaching out to a sample of employers. But the program did have in place what we refer to as a certificate of grant recipient. So the employers in the private sector that Labor and Immigration had delivered to were required to fill out a form and submit as part of their grant agreement, essentially indicating that all of the eligible employees that they had applied for had received the benefit. And we had received that form from all of our employers. There was only a select few who we had to do some additional follow-up on. But virtually all of the employers on the private sector side had provided that to us, which gave us further confidence that the employees had received their benefit.
Thank you very much. I quickly want to shift now to the Fair Registration Practices Act and the Fairness for Newcomers Office, which is discussed on page 39 of the annual report. How many foreign-trained professionals are currently living in Alberta but are not working in their profession because their qualifications aren't recognized? Just looking for a number.
I don't have that number for you today, but we can do our best to try to provide.
Thank you very much. If follow-up would be great. Now, one of the objectives in the Act and the Office is to ensure that regulatory bodies provide an interim registration decision within 6 months. In the baseline survey summary published in December 2021, it was indicated that this was an objective that many regulatory bodies struggle to meet, and that future reporting on this objective would be forthcoming. There's no further reporting that I could find on the Open Government website. What was the timeline for reaching 100% compliance with this objective?
So Gosha, are you able to help us with that question?
So the baseline was done in 2020, and there was a few regulators were identified that they are not meeting the interim decision timeline of 6 months. And the Fairness for Newcomers Office has worked with those professional regulatory bodies to help them streamline processes and ensure that they are compliant with the Act. In terms of in 2021, there were follow-up survey done, and the data were analyzed, and that work is now with skilled trades and professions since October.
Yeah, so when can Albertans expect the next report on the progress or lack thereof being made on these important objectives?
The other department is working on it. I don't have a time frame, and we can get back to you on this question.
Okay, so the baseline survey indicates that the 6-month decision timeline is self-reported. What mechanisms are in place to ensure that the data that the regulatory organizations are submitting to you is reliable?
Gosha, can I ask you to continue on this line of questioning?
So the data was collected and under the legislation. So yes, they are self-reported data. They are analyzed by the team. If there are any questions on the data, there are follow-up meetings and set up with the regulators to ask follow-up questions. And there are in instances when information might be not clear or the department had some needed clarifications. There were different mechanisms to seek further information and confirm that information is correct, that it was received.
Okay, thank you. The foreign qualification recognition is discussed on page 40 of the report. How many people were successfully placed in work that matched their skills and knowledge through this program, and what was the target number?
So these programs that are discussed on on page 40, they were intended to develop online tools. So we didn't measure how many Albertans were actually successful in obtaining jobs because that was not objectives of the programs. So the mentorship connection program was to develop online tools that could be used in small areas, in rural areas, and help people to understand mentorship concept and online alternative career process.
Pardon me, pardon me. The time has expired there again. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I can't, once it goes beyond 30 seconds, I actually can't see the little window. So thank you for that. We'll go to the government side for 10 minutes, please.
Thank you. And I will continue with my last question, which is related to Ministry of Labor, not Ministry of Multiculturalism and Immigration. The number of business contacted for the first time also seemed highly variable. Why was 2021, 2022 such an outlier compared to the previous 2 years? What is the long-term average for that?
Continue with that, please.
Sure. Thank you for the question. So just some context around the new employer visits or new employer contacts. When that program was set up, it was set up based around having staff conduct in-person visits to new employers to provide information about occupational health and safety and employment standards. Through the pandemic, one of the things that shifted is that, like just about everywhere else in the world of work, we made greater use of technology and began accomplishing the objectives of that program through phone, through video conference, and enabled us to significantly expand our reach in terms of contacting new employers. The content of the discussions with the new employers remains the same. The types of information provided about occupational health and safety and employment standards remains the same. It's just that we're able to do a lot more and a lot more efficiently using technology now. So we would expect to see continued the numbers to continue to be larger than they were previously.
Thank you. Still looking at page 44 of the annual report, which mentions that changes to Part 13 and Part 20 of the Occupational Health and Safety Code came into effect on December 1st, 2021. Can you tell me more about the process the ministry used to determine these changes, and what was the feedback you received on the changes to Part 13 and Part 20 of the OHS code from the Alberta industry and businesses?
Miles, can I ask you to answer that question as well?
Sure. Thank you, Deputy. So in December 2019, government committed to reviewing OHS legislation and associated regulations. The purpose of that review was to maintain or improve safety outcomes while reducing administrative burden, simplify requirements and language, remove duplication to improve clarity, evaluate if outcomes can be improved through the use of performance-based requirements, update technical provisions to reflect current best practices, and resolve inconsistencies or drafting errors that had occurred over the years to ensure that the legislation is implemented as intended, and then align where possible or where applicable with other provinces. As part of that review, we looked at requirements for health and safety committees and representatives, as well as radiation safety. The intent was to develop a framework for these areas in the OHS Act while moving technical details to the OHS code. With respect to Part 20, which relates to radiation of the OHS code, frontline department staff recognized there was duplication between the former OHS Act and the Radiation Protection Act. This created confusion because many work sites did not recognize that both acts applied to radiation hazards at the same time. While there was considerable overlap between the two former acts, the requirements were not identical, which contributed to further confusion. The process was to move forward to reconcile those differences and have all of those rules contained in one place, being the OHS code. From a process perspective, the department conducted consultations in the summer of 2020. This included an online survey as well as virtual stakeholder sessions. The survey was open to the public, received a total of 320 responses for the OHS changes and 12 for the radiation changes. This included 47 unions, labor associations, industry associations, employer groups, and health and safety or professional associations whose input the ministry specifically asked for. With respect to Part 13, which is health and safety committees, the department had heard that health and safety committees are a vital part of the part of workplace health and safety. However, the requirements were seen by many to be overly complex or detailed and inflexible, and made them difficult to comply with. This was especially true for work sites with multiple employers. With these insights from stakeholders, changes to the Health and Safety Committee and Health and Safety Representative requirements were made to help provide more flexibility when forming committees or establishing a health and safety representative that empower workers to be involved in their work sites' health and safety cultures. Essential elements of health and safety committees and health and safety representatives were maintained as the enabling framework in the Act, and some of the technical requirements were moved to the OHS code where they exist now. Feedback has generally been positive with respect to these changes. With respect to the changes around radiation protection, I think it's a smaller set of stakeholders that deal with that issue in workplaces, but those changes have been generally well received. Feedback with respect to health and safety committees has generally been positive in that greater clarity is now provided to worksite parties.
Well, thank you for that detailed answer here. And also one more question here on the page, referring to page 44 again. The report mentions that a review of the OHS code after updates to the Act were completed. Can you tell me more about the cyclical plan to review the OHS code?
Yes, thank you for that. So under the OHS Act, the minister is required to publish a plan for the review of the OHS code every 3 years. The OHS code is a ministerial regulation that contains all of the technical requirements and rules that workplaces must follow to keep workers healthy and safe. Technical requirements in the code require regular updates to keep pace with changing workplace practices, evolving technologies, and other emerging issues, and also to ensure interjurisdictional harmonization to support labor mobility and trade. It's important that these reviews and updates are done on a routine basis to ensure that the code's requirements keep pace with those standards and don't become out of date. The OHS code review plan is published and provides Albertans with an understanding of the OHS code review work that is being conducted on a year-by-year basis, and that enables interested stakeholders to kind of plan and organize how they're going to participate in the process.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I will now pass on my remaining time to MLA Tour.
Thank you, MLA Yasin. Thank you, Chair. And I want to start by saying thank you to the department and the officials for joining us today and answering the very important questions to the Albertans. My question will be for the Certificate of Recognition Program. And actually, I was glad to see on page 53 of the annual report that by the end of 2021 to 2022, Certificate of Recognition Program or the COR program, its requirements were reduced by an impressive 34.6%. So the question is, can you explain more about this program overall?
This is a matter Miles is responsible for, so I think I'll ask him to continue with this question.
Sure. Thank you, Deputy, and thank you for the question. The Certificate of Recognition Program was established in 1989 to encourage Alberta employers to build occupational health and safety management.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We'll go over to the official opposition side, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the officials for being here today to answer our questions. I want to begin by asking about the Anti-Racism Advisory Council, which is mentioned very briefly on page 19 of the annual report. So just for confirmation, the Anti-Racism Advisory Council was first established in 2017, and then of course the recommendations were made by the council, which took some time to be disclosed to the public, but the ministry took over responsibility for the council in the fiscal year under consideration. Is that correct? So during the fiscal year of 2021, how often did the Advisory Council meet, and what support did the council receive directly from your ministry in their work?
Gosha, can I ask you to take this question, please?
The council meets typically 4 times a year. The responsibility for the file was transferred to Ministry of Labor and Immigration in July 2021. In terms of the support that the council received, we support council. The department has a secretariat that plays a support function in terms of support with the minutes, with the development of agenda, with preparation and logistical aspects in terms of the preparations for those meetings. So that kind of a support was provided to council, so the meeting can be conducted and discussions can be held by the council.
Thank you very much. Sorry if I cut you off. We just have short time here. Later in 2022, the action plan for the anti-racism work was released by government. So presumably the work was being done in the fiscal year under consideration of 2021. And I'm wondering what role the council actually played in developing the action plan that was released by government, and how much the ministry worked with the council to actually develop that action plan, and what plans there were to fund the actions in that plan.
So in terms of how we worked with the council, and so we received the council's recommendations, and they were disclosed in 2021 to the public, and we use those recommendations as foundations for the development of the action plan. So there was a thorough analysis conducted in terms of each recommendations that was provided by the council, and all those recommendations laid foundations, and some were reflected in the action plan that was released in 2022. The draft action plan was shared with the council prior to release in 2022.
Thank you for that. So obviously the ministry then is still playing a key role in coordinating it. And we know the action plan contains, work that has to be done across many ministries, including what was labor and immigration. So what role is the ministry continuing to play? And now at that time, what was the plan to actually coordinate that work? And what were the targets and performance measures to ensure that that action plan was being completed?
So the ministry had ADM committee that comprises of a number of departments across the government of Alberta. Meetings were held to discuss council's recommendations and also the development of the action plan. And that was a very coordinated effort that government undertook to ensure that the action plan that's going to be released reflects a very comprehensive work that is done by the department and also reflects recommendations we received from the council.
Thank you. If I may, it was quite disappointing to see how little the work of the advisory council, the anti-racism work, was reflected in this annual report. And considering it is a major commitment by the government, it should be at least a major commitment. It should be reflected in the work of the ministry that is leading that council work. So that's a recommendation for the ministry going forward. I want to go back to the Alberta Advantage immigration program streams, and in particular, talking about the rural renewal stream and the rural entrepreneur stream. As I see from the annual report on page 36, it indicates that there's no real uptake on that yet, or nothing to report, I suppose, on that uptake. So what are the targets for those two particular streams from the ministry in terms of applications and approvals?
So in terms of rural renewal, how the stream works, it's really a two-step process, and it's really community-driven stream. So community applies to Government of Alberta, to Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, and they put forward the application indicating that they want to be part of the program. We have now since the launch of the program in February 2022, we have received over 60, we have approved over 60 communities to participate in the program. Once the community is approved, they start the recruitment process and they attract workers from abroad. So we are expecting a very steady flow of applications, given the number of communities that are enrolled in this program. In terms of the rural entrepreneur stream, the program works somewhat similar. It's also driven by the communities. They need to be interested in the program. They identify to us that they want to participate, that they are ready to welcome entrepreneurs, or they have some businesses that they potentially are thinking that could be sold, and they interact directly with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs need to come and do exploratory visit.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just going to cut you off a little bit just because of time. So then it doesn't sound like there's actually a target, though. It sounds like it's being driven by perhaps interest from the rural communities, but there's no target by the ministry. So that does answer my question. I'm going to go to page 36 as well on the same topic about the graduate entrepreneur and foreign graduate entrepreneur streams. And the annual report indicates that there was no uptake and that changes were made to improve uptake. And I'm wondering what changes were made to improve uptake in those two streams going forward.
So we changed criteria in both of those streams. In terms of the foreign graduate, we worked with designated agencies. There are two designated agencies that help promote the program, and they help also ensure that applicants who apply to us, they are ready. We worked with those agencies. They identified some areas for improvement, and we adjusted criteria. We lowered the language benchmark from CLB 7 to CLB 5, and we also extended the education. Initially, we were looking to target entrepreneurs who graduated within the past 2 years, and we extended this criteria to the 10-year time frame to help with the intake. We also made some changes to the international grant stream, which is focused on Alberta graduate, and we removed the work requirement. As such, you can apply just after the school to the program, and also we allowed those who already started businesses to apply to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm going to switch gears now to go back actually to the Jobs Now program, because I want to go back to a response that the deputy provided around how they targeted which labor markets or which sectors would require or be eligible for this. And I'm curious because in both the economic recovery plan that was issued by the government of Alberta, it indicated, at least on paper, that childcare was a key part of economic recovery. And yet we know that childcare sector was not eligible for the Jobs Now program, despite there being a significant labor shortage at the time and continuing to this day, to the point that the GOA is now actively recruiting childcare educators. So why was the childcare sector excluded from this critical program when childcare was supposedly a key part of the economic recovery plan of this government?
I don't have a specific response for you right now. We had many discussions on various sectors that would be included and wouldn't be included based on the volume of people by occupational code. And so I'd have to go back and refresh my memory as to the discussion in that regard. And
Thank you.
I can get back to you.
Thank you. And if you can also indicate, there's a difference between nonprofit and private childcare operators and indicate if there was any distinction between the two. And I don't believe either were eligible for the Jobs Now program. I'm going to go actually to the Auditor General's report related to the First Nations training to employment programs. And specifically, the annual report on page 28 indicates some of the programs that received funding, but it doesn't indicate how much funding was actually provided to each of the programs, the First Nations training to employment and the Aboriginal training to employment program. So how much was allocated to each of those programs?
I think Andre can give you that information.
Given time, perhaps I'll just ask that you table that information with the committee afterwards, as well as whether that was a full budgeted amount for those programs that was actually spent, if you can table that information. But what are the targets and the objectives for and performance evaluations for these two programs, or now the one program?
So we are continuing the work with respect to the auditors program, but generally these programs are partnerships with First Nation communities, both on and off reserve, and it's a capacity building, it's an employment related program, and the goal is to increase employment both on and off reserve.
Okay, I believe the time has elapsed, honorable members, and so we'll go over to the government side, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want Deputy to continue from the same answer from this, the Certificate of Recognition Program.
Thank you. So you had asked in general terms what the Certificate of Recognition program is all about. It's a program that was established in 1989 to encourage Alberta employers to build occupational health and safety management systems and take a proactive approach to reducing the human and financial costs of work-related injuries and illness. The program is voluntary and is delivered through the combined efforts of the department, 10 certifying partners, and the Workers' Compensation Board. Employers can earn a certificate of recognition after a successful audit of their OHS management system by a certified auditor that meets the scoring and quality requirements established by the provincial program standards. So in general terms, that's what the program is about. In addition, I would add that achieving the certificate of recognition enables employers to be eligible for rebates or savings on their workers' compensation premiums.
Thank you. And how did this benefit Alberta employers?
Well, from the department perspective, we think there is tremendous value in employers implementing a health and safety management system that meets program standards and is subject to audit. Taking a systems approach to preventing injuries and illness pays off immensely in terms of preventing injuries at the work site. And in addition, as I mentioned, the program results in employers becoming eligible for additional savings through the workers' compensation system.
Thank you. And my next question will be for the employment standard complaint resolutions. If you look at page 54 of the annual report, which indicates that the average days to begin an employment standard investigation, it decreased significantly from 26 days in 2021 to just 12 days in the past year, while the number of complaints remained relatively stable. So the question is, can you tell me how the ministry was able to significantly improve the performance in this area?
Go ahead, Thank you for that question. Timely resolution of employment standards complaints is a priority for the department and the employment standards program. Over the fiscal year in question and previous years, the department worked to maintain timely, fair, and quality services to employers and employees. Really, in terms of the reduction in the amount of time to begin an investigation, there were a number of factors that came together kind of all at once. The department and the program had made significant efforts to streamline our internal processes to reduce the time it takes us to get things moving and to do our work. And so that played a big part of that. In addition, you noted that the complaint levels in 2020-21 and 2021-22 remained relatively stable. For both of those years, the number of complaints received was down a fair bit from pre-pandemic levels, and so that did enable us to get caught up on our timely service delivery and get things back to a place where Albertans are receiving much quicker service and now being able to maintain those levels.
Thank you. And if you also look at the page 55, same page and same annual report, which indicates that not all the situations lend themselves to a voluntary resolution. So the question is, what sort of the situations wouldn't lend themselves to a voluntary resolution?
Thank you for the question. So voluntary resolution is the preferred or first approach for employment standards officers to resolve disputes. Through education and sharing information, both parties to a complaint are in a position to resolve their differences and reach compliant. We find that this approach is more efficient, less time consuming, and provides fair outcomes for both parties. That said, as you note, there are circumstances where voluntary resolution cannot be achieved. This can include complaints where parties wish to have the matter reviewed by an appeal body, or there are also some unfortunate situations where businesses have ceased operating and simply there's no way to resolve things voluntarily because there's no employer to pay to resolve the complaint. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the rest of the time, I can pass on to my colleague, MLA Panda.
Thank you, MLA Toor, and thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you in the room. Thank you.
Thank you. On page 22 of the annual report, I'm referring Canada-Alberta Job Grant Program. So I noticed that there was a significant increase in the number of Canada-Alberta job grant applications approved. So it went up from 5,031 in 2020-21 to 9,024 applications approved in 21-22. And the annual report also mentions changes were made to the program eligibility in February 2021. So can you tell me more about the program changes that were made and how those changes benefited Albertans and Alberta employers?
Thank you for the question. The Canada-Alberta Job Grant, as you may know, is a federal-provincial partnership through which employers and government share the cost of training Alberta employees. CAJG aims to increase employer investment in training, productivity, worker skills, and worker retention. I would say that it's really the sole real employer-funded program on an ongoing basis that the government has. The initial 21-22 budget for CAJG was $13.4 million. Additional mid-year adjustments brought the total budget to $31.4 million in response to principally higher employer demand for the program. The program is funded using a combination of labor market development agreement and workforce development agreement allocations. In terms of the portion of your question referencing changes, in February 2021, temporary program changes were made to encourage economic recovery in response to the pandemic. Changes expanded eligibility criteria, making the program more accessible to small employers and family-owned and operated businesses. There were 3 specific changes or significant changes with respect to the eligibility criteria. First, mandatory training. Employers were allowed employers to fund required courses that are legislated or mandatory for a job, including training for truck drivers. Family members allowed employers to fund courses for employed family members within a business, and small businesses allowed employers with less than 4 employees, including the owner, to invest in their own skills development.
Thank you, Deputy. I'll get back to you if time permits, but I also want to ask another important question about Alberta Immigrant Mentorship Innovation Grant. That's a great program which is intended to support immigrants to use their professional skills and contribute to Alberta's economy. So could you tell me more about that grant program and also about the organizations or types of organizations that received such funding briefly?
The Alberta Immigrant Mentorship Innovation Grant supports organizations in delivering mentorship programs that help newcomers find meaningful employment based on their work experience, education, and skills. It does this by matching newcomer professionals with mentors. New Albertans can establish professional connections that help them find meaningful employment and strengthen Alberta's workforce. The grant is intended to support immigrants to use their professional skills and contribute to Alberta's economy. The grant also aims to increase employer and community capacity to provide mentorship programming to have a positive effect on labor attraction and retention efforts. Maybe I'll just quickly say with respect to...
Thank you.
Thank you, honourable members. We'll now go to the official opposition side, please.
Is that correct? Thank you. Can the department please table with this committee, just to cut off the last conversation we had about any performance measurements that have been developed or in the works related to the First Nations training to employment programs that will provide Albertans with some indication as to how those funds are being used and what the outcomes are of those programs. Page 31 of the annual report indicates that the IQAS issued almost 18,000 assessment certificates, which is 1,000 fewer than the year before and 4,500 fewer than in 2019. Can the department indicate why they believe there's been a decrease? Has there been fewer requests for assessments, or what does the ministry attribute that decrease to? With respect to the Alberta Advantage immigration program streams, what is the average length of time for approvals of applications in 2021 by stream, and how does this compare with other provinces and jurisdictions? With respect to red tape reduction, page 62 of the annual report states that in 2021, the ministry reduced 1,812 regulatory requirements as part of its red tape reduction objectives. Please table with this committee a detailed list of each of the 1,812 regulatory requirements that was eliminated or reduced in 2021. With respect to the fair practices registration, what are the barriers preventing regulatory bodies from achieving the 6-month decision timeframe? In the opinion of the ministry, is it staffing? And if so, did the government make any estimates as to the additional cost to the regulatory agencies for achieving these timelines? And who does the government anticipate to cover those costs? Is it government or the members of the regulatory agencies through their membership fees? And I'll turn over the remaining time to my colleague, MLA Renaud.
Thank you. So, Jobs Now program, would you please table with the committee the average earnings of the 2% of disabled employees in the Jobs Now program and what the range was, so the low end and the high end, as well for non-disabled workers, so the 98% of the 12,687, what the salary range was for those 12,687 positions, the low and the high. As well, the ministry agreed to give us a breakdown of the 12,687 jobs by sector. Could you also break that down by geographic sort of areas, whether it was Edmonton, Calgary, rural, suburban? And were there any sector targets? And if so, would the ministry please table those sector targets for the Jobs Now program? Thank you.
Anything more from the official opposition? Seeing none, we'll go over to the government side, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The government side has no reading questions at this time.
Okay, very good. Thanks very much, everyone. And I'd like to thank officials from the Ministry of Jobs, Economy and Northern Development and the Office of the Auditor General for their participation in responding to committee members' questions. The committee asked that any outstanding questions be responded to in writing within 30 days and forwarded to the committee clerk. Now moving on, honourable members, at our meeting last week on February 14th, the committee was advised that a draft annual report to the legislature on the committee's activities during the calendar year 2022 would be prepared. The draft report was posted on the committee's internal website on Wednesday, February 15th for our review. I would like to open the floor to any comments, questions, or motions in relation to that annual report to the Assembly for 2022. I'm not seeing any discussion on this matter right now. I'm just going to look to the floor one more time because I'm not in the room. Giving people a chance to pipe up. Okay, then I'll ask that someone move that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts approve the draft 2022 annual report of the committee to the Legislative Assembly as distributed.
So moved.
Oh, thank you. I can't see the floor now that the motion is up on the screen, so thank you for that. So now we'll go to discussion on the motion. And I'm going to rely on the clerk. I don't think anyone has signaled that that there's any members wishing to discuss.
No, Madam Chair, there's been no members.
Okay, very good. Then we will now call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
And now I'm in a position where I can neither see nor hear the committee. Oh, I need to mute. All in favor?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? All right, seeing none then, that motion is carried. Friends, we'll move on to item 6 on our agendas. This may be the final meeting of the committee prior to the dissolution of the 30th legislature. The committee should consider how it will approve the minutes of today's meeting. A process recently followed by some other committees has been to authorize the chair to approve the final minutes after they've been distributed to committee members for their review. I'll open the floor for a discussion and a possible motion. And if, Mr. Clerk, if you could let me know what the outcome of, if there's anyone signaling, that would be helpful at this point.
Does anyone have any comments? Oh, sure.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just indicate my agreement with this. I know some of our other members sit on other committees, and we have seen this process followed where the chair approves the final meetings minutes, and I don't see any concern with that.
Thank you. So I'll look to the floor then for an honourable member to move the motion that the Standing Committee on Public Accounts authorized the chair to approve the minutes of the February 21st, 2023 meeting of the committee after they have been circulated to committee members for review. Is there any discussion on that? Sorry, first I need someone to move it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll move that motion.
Thank you, honourable member. Is there any discussion on this motion?
Not hearing anything in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. And so I will then call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Are there... seeing none, that motion is carried. Thank you. We'll now move on to other business. Are there any other items for discussion under other business?
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Member Stefan. And seeing none, then I'll call first is that the date of next meeting is at the call of the chair. And I'll now call for a motion to adjourn. Would a member move that the meeting be adjourned?
So moved. Mark Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. With that, all in favor?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Thank you. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.